Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Jewish Community Foundation's Access to Insight in Depth. Just a few housekeeping things to begin. First of all, we're going to be recording this webinar, and you'll be receiving the resources afterwards that we're going to be talking about in this session. Now, the reason I bring that up is, first of all, if you can't stay on for the full hour and a half, no worries, you'll get the recording. But additionally, don't worry if you don't take down or note any of the resources that we're talking about, because we'll be sharing all of the information afterwards in an email with you guys. Secondly, we're going to be making good use of the chat box. Feel free to submit questions that way, and if any of the resources that we mention up front or during the session you want to share, or you want to share your information with us so we can send you a particular resource, feel free to stick that information in the chat and we will direct it to the right person. It only goes to JCF. It does not go to all the attendees of this webinar. Finally, this is going to be 90 minutes long. There'll be a 5-minute video in the middle in between the presentation by the JED Foundation and our panel afterwards. That might be a good opportunity for a stretch break if you need it. So for those who aren't as familiar with the Jewish Community Foundation, JCF has facilitated over $1.6 billion in grants since we were founded in 1967. We take a concierge approach to philanthropy, meaning that we believe that we work with every individual separately to help them make a difference in the world. We serve individuals, families, and community organizations. Some of our specialties include multi-generational philanthropy, legacy planning, impact investment, and acceptance of complex assets and complex charitable gifts. With $650 million in assets under management, a large part of our responsibility as a community foundation is to educate and inspire our fund holders and the broader San Diego community, which is why we're all here today. In that vein, I would like to share a few opportunities that are upcoming that we offer at the foundation. First of all, we have a new product that we're offering. We read very widely at JCF about nonprofits, the world of philanthropy, as well as Jewish causes in San Diego and beyond. If you'd like to read over our shoulders with us and receive a regular email every couple of weeks with our curated selection of the most interesting things we've run across, just put your name and email in the chat and we'll add you to the list. This is free and open to everybody. Next, we do a lot of work each year with professional advisors. One of the highlights of our calendar, which sadly has to be virtual this year, is our annual Professional Advisors Luncheon. If you work in wealth management, tax, estates and trust planning, financial advising, accounting, fiduciary services, or any related professional advisor role, you won't want to miss this event with Dana Holt on non-cash asset donations. If you'd like more information on this event, just stick a note in the chat and we will send you more information and the registration link. Also, if you're a professional advisor and you're not yet a member of our Trusted Charitable Advisor Network, enrollment is now open for our 2021 class. This program helps professional advisors develop the skills and confidence to incorporate charitable giving into their own offerings to their own clients. It's also an incredible network, and this slide is about to get very busy, as we show you a small sample of the amazing local and national firms that are part of our TCA network. Intended for experienced professionals, whether in solo practice or at a large organization, advisors will receive tremendous value for the lunchtime workshops and the networks you'll become part of. For more information, go to the webpage, jcfsandiego.org/TCA, or you can reach out to Charlene via email, or just stick a note in the chat and we will follow up with you. Finally, the Jewish Women's Foundation is a network of women who have joined together to improve the lives of women and girls. The annual Let's Talk About It event has been rebranded and reimagined for COVID times as Let's Laugh About It, and it features Emmy winner Judy Gold. That's coming up on Sunday, March 21st. If you're interested in learning more about the Jewish Women's Foundation or this event, you can reach out to Sarah, or you can stick a note in the chat and we'll follow up with you. Okay, so on to today's important topic. And just to set the context for our topic, as you all know, school districts across the country have been put in the incredibly challenging position of having to weigh the benefit of in-person education against the potential health risks for teachers and students, as well as staff, families, and so many others. Virtual learning, family struggles, and social isolation have compounded the regular emotional roller coaster ride of the teenage years. Just this month, the San Diego Union Tribune reported that Rady's Children's Hospital has seen a 7% increase in psychiatric emergency visits. No one disputes both the psychological and academic toll of school closings, as well as the broader restrictions in society. And as we know, the burdens have not been evenly distributed, with some parts of the country much more open than others. And even within the same cities, some schools have managed to open while others have not been able to. Minority and other vulnerable communities have faced particular challenges. But yet there is hope. The president has stated that vaccines should be available for all by this summer, meaning we are hopefully months away from a return to something that looks more like normalcy. And more importantly, there is amazing research, amazing organizations, and amazing resources dedicated to helping teens and their parents come through this time stronger, more healthy, and more resilient. Today is going to be divided into two halves. First, we're so fortunate to have the JED Foundation provide a presentation on the most up-to-date thinking, research, and understanding on teen mental health. Then our panel discussion will provide a range of resources, tips, and strategies from their experiences so that you can walk away with both an educational understanding and some real tangible resources to apply in your lives and the lives of those people around you. If you're a JCF fund holder, you're also invited to part 2 of this Access to Insight series on March 10th. We'll be having a roundtable with a selection of mental health nonprofits on how to most impactfully deploy philanthropic resources in this important area. As I said, this session will be 90 minutes with a short video in the middle. We're going to take questions and answers throughout. And if you want to submit them via the chat or Q&A, feel free to do so. And we're going to have all the questions answered at the end after our panel discussion. Finally, I just want to thank all of our community partners who helped draw awareness to today's event, including the Community Jewish High, Jewish Academy, SWAL, Torah High and Sky High, as well as the Jewish Teen Initiative and our own JTF, Jewish Teen Foundation. Okay, so on to our presentation. So I'd love to introduce our presenters from the JED Foundation. Dr. Suzanne Button is a clinical psychologist and joined the JED Foundation with 20 years of experience working with adolescents and their families and the systems that serve and educate youth. Suzanne has worked in the publicly funded mental health, social service, and education system for most of her career. Prior to coming to JED, she worked as a policy fellow for Chaplain Hill at the University of Chicago. I didn't say that right, my apologies. Emily Bader is a licensed social worker with 6 years of experience in youth development within the nonprofit sector. Previously, she was a senior program manager at Big Brothers Big Sisters of New York City. Emily joins the JED team as the inaugural high school advisor on the recently launched JED High School Implementation Team. We're very fortunate to have Suzanne and JED speak today. For those of you who aren't familiar with the JED Foundation, they are one of, if not the leading organization dedicated to young adult mental health. I'll let them explain a bit more about their organization and take it from here. So over to you guys.
Thanks, Ollie. I'm going to need screen sharing capabilities.
One sec. You got it.
All right, can you see my screen? Thank you so much for that great introduction. So I am Emily Bader, social worker and high school advisor at the JED Foundation, joined by my colleague, clinical psychologist Suzanne Button, Dr. Suzanne Button, who is our senior clinical director at the JED Foundation. We're so excited to be here today to present on the teenage brain. So what are we going to cover today? So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the JED Foundation and who we are. Then we'll talk about what is going on in the teenage brain, mental health in young people, COVID's effect on the brain. review some parenting strategies, and then end with the JED Foundation's comprehensive approach to mental health. The JED Foundation is a nonprofit that protects the emotional health and prevents suicide for our nation's teens and young adults. We partner with high schools and colleges to help them strengthen their mental health, substance misuse, and suicide prevention programs and systems. We encourage community awareness, understanding, and action for young adult mental health. A little bit of additional background: we were founded back in 2000 when Phil and Donna Satow lost their youngest son, Jed, to suicide. Jed was a sophomore at the University of Arizona. The Satows wanted to help colleges support young adult mental health, and we've been working in the higher ed space ever since. I'm excited to share that we have officially launched our JED high school program as of this week, and we are working with our first cohort of schools, 13 schools, and growing. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Button to talk about what is going on in the teenage brain.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks to Ali and the Jewish Community Foundation for having us be a part of this terrific event today. I love talking about the teenage brain. There's so much going on in the teen brain, and I like to harken back to when I first went to graduate school, and the prevailing myth about the teenage brain was that it was a brain whose ups and downs were driven by hormonal flooding, right? And we still sort of think about teenagers that way today. But the neuroscience tells us that there is so much more going on in the teen brain that it's important to understand. Indeed, this is the second most important time for brain transformation. It may even be a parallel time in terms of dramatic changes and importance to the 0 to 5 years, which we all know are tremendously powerful time in the brain. Somewhere around the age of 12, neuronal signals begin happening in the brain, thought to be triggered by some early hormonal signals sometime between 10 and 11. And what begins to happen is a dramatic cellular restructuring across the brain. The image that you see here is an averaged PET scan image of changes in the adolescent brain. So the beginning brain at age 5, right, around the middle, age 10, you see that blue area begin to increasingly form across the outer cover of the brain. And by some time around age 19 or 20 for females and age 23 to 25 for males, what we then see is the full forming of what's called the prefrontal cortex. And that is actually the adult brain. So this involves a lot of restructuring. Cells are changing, synapses, which are the primary place or point of communication between cells, are shifting, and the structures are reorganizing to both increase the focal functioning of pathways in the brain and to also increase what's something called myelinization, which makes the messaging more intense and more effective. Synaptic growth, again, that's the places where the brain cells message one another, continues, but actually this is a second important time of synapse pruning. So what that means is different areas of messaging are reduced and they become more effective and more focused. Next slide, please. These changes in the brain yield a lot of developmental opportunities. The adolescent brain really is one of the most plastic times of the brain, right? It's a brain that has that childlike capacity for learning that we begin to lose after all of this restructuring happens, but it's still a young enough brain that there's a lot of plasticity. It's changeable. That myelinization, that increased focus, means that the processing speed of the adolescent brain is enhancing all the time. It's also true that as part of this restructuring, the teenage brain is more reactive to reward. And it's really interesting. What we understand from the neuroscience is that teens are actually more responsive to large rewards, not small rewards. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Teenagers all have enhanced analytic ability. And I'm actually a late in life parent of 14-year-old twins. I had my 14-year-old daughter talk to me the other day about how some of the things that I was doing for her were not helpful to her mental health. So her enhanced analytic ability now she's taking on her mom, the national expert, and trying to teach her mom a little bit about what's good for a teenager's mental health. And I'm sure many of you out there who are parenting teens are experiencing the double-edged sword of that enhanced analytic ability, but we really want to work to see it as a strength. Teenagers start to show us these amazing windows of maturity and competence, empathy, and self-awareness. But remember, it's okay for it to be spotty. Remember that picture we saw, that prefrontal cortex is emerging over time, and this high level of mature functioning seems sometimes to be very inconsistent because of those ongoing changes in the brain. Finally, you're going to start to see, as teenagers get higher and higher up in the teenage years, an increased ability to use what's called the executive functions. And so these are things like the capacity to stay focused, pay attention, to control your impulses and delay gratification and think through decisions. But remember, the maddeningly spotty appearance of increased executive function is actually a normal reflection of what's going on in the teenage brain. Next slide. There are also lots of risks and challenges that come with this changing brain. Because of that higher sensitivity to reward, actually what we find in the adolescent brain is that dopamine rewards need to be stronger and higher for kids to have neuronal responses during this time. Teens can be more sensation seeking. They can look for risk taking. It's a normal part of that developmental process. There's also an increased vulnerability to addiction in the adolescent years, in part because that dopamine response is heightened and that impulse control is still developing. And again, just as we wouldn't want to hyper stress an infant or a toddler in that incredibly vulnerable brain change time, all of these neurobiological changes make teenagers more vulnerable to stress. That spottiness of cognitive control can also be increasingly spotty when young people are flooded with gonadal hormones, right? And so kids can be reactive, enhanced in reactivity. They can be more socially and emotionally reactive, sometimes more distractible because of that flooding. Now, the other piece that's happening with that prefrontal cortex is the increased capacity to think about one's thinking and view one's own cognition with one's prefrontal cortex. So what also can seem difficult is that kids can seem more narcissistic sometimes, more focused on their own needs and more impulsive around that. Right? The other piece is that vulnerability to stress can be enhanced because of the challenges with sleep that are actually biologically inherent in adolescence, right? The circadian rhythms begin to shift. And we also have a lot of societal challenges to sleep that we'll talk about a little bit later. Next slide. So Emily, I think this is you. You're going to talk a little bit about mental health. Yeah.
Thanks, Susie. So I'm going to set the stage and talk a little bit about teen mental health. So 1 in 4 young adults experiences a mental health challenge, yet 46% are not receiving treatment or counseling. Obviously, depression and anxiety rates are on the rise. 60% of first-year college students wish that they were better prepared for the emotional transition out of high school. Suicide and accidental drug overdose are the leading cause of death for young people. BIPOC students, LGBTQ youth, and other potentially marginalized groups face additional mental health stressors. So obviously teens are struggling. So this should come as no surprise, but COVID-19 may be making mental health worse. The pandemic has had so many impacts on all of our mental health, but I want to point out a couple that are particularly notable. Increased symptoms or severity of anxiety, depression, and PTSD, increased substance use and misuse, lack of purposefulness, feelings of hopelessness, and I'm going to talk on the next couple slides about lack of social connectedness and missing milestones and how this affects teen mental health. So it's reasonable to assume that most of us on this call have been impacted by lack of social connectedness. And this is pervasive whether you're a young person or an older person. But something that I want to discuss today is this concept of individuation and separation. So it's important to note that during the teen development years, teens are moving away from relying on parents and families for support and are moving towards relying on friends and peers for support, problem solving, especially when they're in distress. Not having the opportunity to turn to and rely on friends is extremely distressing for teens. There was an article a couple months back in the New York Times entitled, "There is no vaccine for teenage despair." And the author so brilliantly talked about not only the loneliness and isolation experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, but the experience of having all of these thoughts and feelings and not being connected to friends to actually talk through and have that peer support. So I want you all to take a moment and think back on all the milestones that you've missed this year. Weddings, bar mitzvahs, family trips, graduations. I'm sure that you all have a long Rolodex of things that you have missed. And for teens, of course, they have missed a lot of milestones as well. But for teens, forgoing rites of passages cause sadness and disappointment, and it's just not the same way that adults process this kind of disappointment. For many adolescents, they need a sense of purpose to help develop their young adult identity. Think about teen athletes or teens who are involved in drama performances or other activities. Maybe they've been waiting their entire career to play in a big sports game or get their driver's license, and it's just not happening this year. Additionally, with school being remote or hybrid, opportunities to form new connections is nearly impossible. Not only is socializing hard enough, but many teens are struggling to make friends, especially if they're in their beginning years of high school. Lastly, college-bound students might feel particularly anxious or ambivalent about post-secondary options when they didn't have the opportunity to take the SATs in a normal way. They didn't have the opportunity to tour colleges. It might be very defeating and leave them feeling less than enthused about next steps. Overall, teenagers are feeling uninspired and hopeless. I'm going to throw it back to Susie to talk about parenting.
So we're going to think a little bit then in terms of what we heard about the specific context of the teenage brain and also COVID-19 and some of the challenges that are associated with that. What's a parent or a caregiver or a family member to do? So I want you to think a little bit about some of the developmental imperatives that might come along with that forming free prefrontal cortex, right? We heard that young people are passionate, they're reactive, right? And this is part of what they need to sort of launch into that adult brain. So the caring adults in their life need to shape that intensity with constructive experience. So right away, we hear about a COVID-related challenge because many of the organic structures that shaped teen experience have been sort of shut down or limited. Teens also need a net. They are going to try different things out with their peers, their own identity, right? They're going to have times where they can regulate themselves well emotionally and make good decisions, but they're also going to make mistakes. So they need a caring safety net to sort of think things through and learn from those mistakes. They need the adults in their life to help them develop and implement strategies, plans, and goals at increasing levels of difficulty. This is a lovely concept from a developmental psychologist named Vygotsky, who talked about the fact that parents need to scaffold their children. We think about this a lot in toddlerhood and infancy, right? Helping kids walk, learn to read, learn to speak, learn to eat. But we don't necessarily think about it in adolescence. So again, we want to increasingly hand the reins over to our teens and help them think things through for themselves. They want us to understand some of their seemingly inappropriate, challenging, or sensation-seeking behaviors, but we can't ignore risk. So we have to help keep them safe, right? And we want to help them use their own narcissism, right? So they love ideas and big principles, and they love to feel important. So we want to channel that and use it to our advantage. And teens like facts. They actually don't appreciate us arguing with them about our values. I like to tell the parents that I work with in my private practice, you have instilled your values in your teen. Now you want to help them think through and apply those values for themselves. Next slide. So I encourage parents to think about shifting communication styles. Listening is key at this age. Listening has far more impact than talking does to teenagers. Make teens feel that they matter. Ask them questions. Tell them you care about them, but be curious about where they're at. Make it clear that you're ready and willing to listen and you care. So ask questions like, what are your worries these days? What are the things that you miss about pre-COVID times? If you were the person who won the presidential election, what would you be doing first to straighten out this mess we're in? Whatever they say, repeat what you heard. Make sure you got it right. Help them think it through. Ask them, right? So one great example is, rather than look at their grades and tell them what you think they need to do, ask them to tell you how they got the grades they got, right? If they're challenged by a quiz or a certain subject, what did you learn from that? What do you want to do differently, right? Let's both offer ideas and then you can decide how to handle it. Always have conversations with your teen during activities either the teen enjoys doing with you, right? Or here's a real trick, activities where you're not across the table looking eye to eye and conversation is not something that's expected on demand. Take your kids on a drive, go for a walk around the block or down the road. Have conversations at times where things are already in a positive space, right? Let your teens have some privacy. They need to know that they don't have to share everything. Allow them to be curious about opinions that are allow them to have and be curious about opinions that differ from yours. I can't tell you how many stories I have of teenagers coming home and taking the opposite political stance from their parents, or trying out a value that is in complete defiance of what parents say is important to them. This is about forming an adult identity. Ask, listen, say when you disagree, but be curious about where they're at. Remember that for adolescents, a lot of these challenging styles of communication and trying out identities are a little bit like puppies when they fight, right? Teenagers are starting to try who they are out on you as their caregivers. And the way that you respond will either make them dig in more or allow them to move through these experiments and these ways of being and decide who they really want to be. Next slide. Really important when you're having an argument with your teen, take a different perspective. Teens don't like having arguments with you, but they do it anyway. They're developing their communication skills. And so they are trying to disagree and dissent and figure out who they are, but they may not yet know how to do that. So that doesn't mean you have to take inappropriate conversation with them. It means you have to give them feedback. Well, when you say it to me that way, it's hard for me to hear. Can you say it in a calmer way, right? They want to be independent and they're practicing for young adulthood. So let them have input and control and let them make small decisions on their own. It doesn't kill you to let them argue you out of a minor decision, right? They can be single-minded and more dug in when they feel controlled or pressured because they feel the developmental pressure that they're going to be on their own soon. And so really let them think things through and don't push back and dig them in because they may actually shoot themselves in the foot if they think you're trying to control or micromanage them. Next slide. Really, really important for adolescents. We want you to learn as caregivers of adolescents to recognize the difference between what we call hot cognition and cold cognition. Hot cognition are those times when kids' prefrontal cortex is not in full function or they're hormonally flooded. So when you start to see things like withdrawal, sarcasm, intensity, using dramatic phrases like, you always do this, you never do that, right? These are times when you know your teen has hot cognition and you will not be able to reason with them. That's a time for you to stay in your seat, get quiet, right? Situations with potentiated reward, particularly perceptions of social embarrassment or high stakes with their peers, can really elicit hot cognition. And so really understand that when your kid is in that space, you need to co-regulate and stay calm. Look for periods of cold cognition to help your kid think things through. The day they get the bad grade on the quiz may not be the day to think through what has to happen for them to get a better grade next time. You're going to see that they're going to be more clear-headed. They're going to exhibit more measured thinking. They're going to be able to think about hypotheticals or impersonals. Often this cognition will happen when their peers are not around, when social pressures are lower, and when they're feeling less emotional intensity. When you start to learn how your individual teenager exhibits hot versus cold cognition, you'll know hot cognition, settle down and co-regulate. Cold cognition, stand next to them, help them think it through. That's the way that they're going to learn and develop those executive function muscles that we talked about a little bit earlier. Next slide. So we like to also think about shifting our strategies, right? We want to shift to a trust strategy versus a control strategy. So the Danbury Mall trip is the one where, right, you take your kid on the Danbury Mall. Actually, I live in the northeast of the United States, and we have a mall that's about an hour from where we live in the country. It's a very nice mall. It's the biggest, fanciest mall within striking distance of us. Often I'll recommend that parents take their teenagers to the Danbury Mall. It's a nice long drive. There's a fun mall at the end of it. And that's a place where you really can ask your kid, your teen, how they're doing, right? Give your kid expectations and give them consequences, but do it in advance of things that have gone awry, and negotiate them in writing. So one example is to leave your kid a note that says, remember that you have to do the dishes and get your homework done before you go down and turn on Fortnite, right? This takes that hot cognition out of it and lets your kid be in control. One of the things that I love about a book by Frances Jensen, who's a National Institute of Health neuroscientist, is that she talks about that high need for dopamine hits and reward, and encourages parents to share harrowing stories with their teens. Rather than tell your teen what they should do, why don't you tell them a harrowing story about what happened to someone who you read about in the paper who was texting and driving, right? Rather than tell them that you think that they shouldn't drink and drive, be sure to come home and tell them about that young person who you heard about who has to breathe into a breathalyzer 3 times a day now and get up at 5:30 in the morning every morning to breathe into it because they were drinking and driving. Share high intensity, harrowing stories that are about a third party. Use the concept of freedom bringing responsibility. Make it clear to your teen, the more you show responsibility, the more freedom I'm going to give you. Communicate what you care about, but don't defend your values. Discuss your limits in advance, as we said, but get input on rules, consequences. Where do we need to flex and where does it work? Start building a compromise culture. The more that you let teens influence decision and rules, the more they learn to negotiate well and effectively in life and in important relationships. Next slide. So I also want to just touch in on COVID-specific strategies. Emily talked earlier about some of the unique mental health challenges, and we're really seeing in data, in the national news reports, we're certainly seeing it. We're seeing a lot of challenges for adolescents, particularly around mental health. So a couple of things to keep in mind. Keep a routine going, right? Make sure that you're getting everybody in the family moving. Make sure that you're getting them eating at the same time on their Zoom screens, doing their school, right? But also skip to the bottom bullet here, mix it up sometimes. Call a veg out day. Everybody in their pajamas, we're going to watch the Avengers movies today. Call that we're going to have popcorn for dinner. Do something surprising. Break up the routine. Help them feel engaged and excited. Help your teen find a sense of purpose. That is not easy in these COVID times. Our structure in our society is set up to scaffold teens increasingly identifying what they care about and do it. So you may have to curate, particularly when you have a younger teen, you may have to curate a sense of purpose and social connection for them. So if you have an artist on your hands, take that artist out and to an outdoor art exhibit. If you have an athlete on your hands, help them organize a pickup game in the park with masks on. Check in with your teen. We can't emphasize this enough. Often caregivers fear that if they talk to their teenager about anxiety or depression or even suicidal ideation, they're going to put those ideas in their teen's head. We find this is the opposite. When you ask your teen how he or she is doing, if they say that they're depressed and you ask them, are they thinking about hurting themselves? Most teens will tell you they find that preventative. They find it caring. help them connect in healthy ways to their peers and to other caring adults, no matter how far away those adults are. And also keep an eye on news exposure. Don't let them watch the same disturbing news stories again and again and again. And if you have the news on all the time, you should turn it off too, right? And keep an eye on how much they're on screens. And Emily, I think, is going to tell you a little bit about some of our work with high schools as well before we end.
Thank you, Susie. So I am going to just wrap this up, sharing a little bit about our JED High School comprehensive approach to mental health promotion and suicide prevention in high schools. It is a mouthful, so we just call it the COMP approach. So our comprehensive approach provides high schools and districts with a framework to support and improve student mental health and reduce risk for suicide. This approach encompasses a series of recommendations grouped under 7 broader domains, which you can see in this beautiful wheel on the screen. And our work with high schools and colleges is a technical assistance model that helps schools evaluate their systems and policies related to student mental health. Just to provide a little bit more context very briefly about our program, so we partner with schools over the course of 18 to 24 months. And we ask schools to form an interdisciplinary team of diverse folks at the school who are student advocates. So we really approach mental health from a public health model. And we really want this to be a school-wide effort and not just falling on the counseling department as it so often does. So a high school advisor, me, a high school advisor, go in and work with the school, and we administer 2 surveys to the schools to understand what they're doing well and where they need a little bit of support. And then we create a tailored strategic plan based on the 7 domains to understand where we can bolster their strengths and where we can offer some resources to provide support. So want to be mindful of time, so we'll just keep it brief there, and we'll hand it back over to Susie to wrap up for the day.
I just want to say one last thing about teenagers and the teenage brain. And I say this as a professional who's worked with teens and their families for 20 years, but also as a parent of 2 14-year-olds who's repeatedly humbled by the actual experience of doing it myself. Hang in there. You know, adolescence can feel incredibly rocky sometimes. Sometimes it can feel like you've lost that wonderful young person that you came to know so well. But as one of my mentors said many years ago, they do come back to you. They make it through, they come back to you, and you sort of understand that it was all worth it because you went through some rough times and it helped them become the young adults that they are. You can do this. We're almost at the end of the tunnel. And JED is here to help. So reach out to us if we can help in any way. And Ali, I think it's back to you.
Thank you. Yes, it is. And first of all, thank you guys so much. I think helping put some context around why teenagers emotionally, but why in their brains they are thinking and acting and firing the way they are. Certainly, I'm sure for a lot of the parents on the call, they're like, oh, okay. Like, you know, you can really kind of understand and get it, but also putting it in the context of the current times that we're going through is super, super helpful. We will share with everyone who's participated the deck that you just provided and the PowerPoint. And there's a few questions that have come in through the Q&A. We'll handle those at the end. And really briefly, we're now going to show just a video just so you have a tiny bit more context on who the JED Foundation is. And then we're going to get our panel going after that. So here is a little introduction about the JED Foundation.
There was no better friend than Jed David Satow.
He was very kind and sweet.
Incredibly charismatic.
He was able to kind of hone in on what was funny about something.
There's no one who yelled louder for his teammates.
Yeah, when he left for college, it was really exciting.
I was very close to him, and I always felt I understood him. But I'm sure there were a lot of things that, looking back, were clues that I didn't see as clues as a parent. I think that if I could if I could go back, I wish I could go back.
After Jed passed away,
The only thing that seemed important to me was to try to figure out what happened.
there was just zero awareness, at least on our part.
What had broken down and what needed to change in the system?
What is depression in a young person? How does it look?
What can a university president be doing to set policies, and I like to think, place a safety net under their campus?
I don't know any other reason to start the Jed Foundation or for it to exist than to try to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore.
Now, I just couldn't be prouder. And I see really all the positive impacts that we're having across so many different schools, millions of different kids that are being touched by these messages and these programs.
I work for the Jed Foundation because my sister, who battled with depression and anxiety and had several bouts of suicide ideation and attempts, she passed away when she was 24 years old. I've made it my mission to really go out and try my best to work with young adults and teens to prevent more instances like this from happening.
So many people deal with this issue and face this issue.
And that's why it's so important that we all band together into a community of caring that surrounds young people so that when they are struggling, they're recognized, they're connected with, and they're able to get the help they need.
So when I think of the idea of a safety net, I really think about not only the policies and systems at a school or in a community, but also the people, the friends, the family, the teachers, the administrators, the professors who are around a young person. And how can we make sure that all of those people who care about the teens and young adults in our country are working together to provide people with the supports and systems that they need to thrive and be healthy?
We know that JED is very important in terms of helping young adults feel more comfortable talking to each other about mental health issues, helping them to feel comfortable reaching out to friends if friends are struggling.
They want a place, a venue to talk about these experiences. They don't want to be silenced. They don't want to be encouraged to be secretive. This is a generation that's very real and very honest about how they feel and what they want.
You have to tap into the students in order to know what they're going through and what they're dealing with.
I think one of the ways that we really see students being impacted comes from the national movement of JED, and a student oftentimes will look at what JED is doing at one of the campuses we work with, and they're inspired, they are impacted to the point that they are writing us letters. They're writing letters to the president of their university asking them to bring JED campus to their institution.
Sometimes administrations are more likely to respond if students say, hey, we want the JED Foundation here as well. Look at the great work that they're doing. We could have this here as well on our campus, and it could be a driving force.
At JED, we realize that there is no one-size-fits-all to serving students. Everyone needs help in terms of mental health resources.
One thing I want people to know about the work that I do at JED is the impact that we're having. We're reaching millions of young people and the families, teachers, and communities that surround them.
I work at the JED Foundation because I think that life is worth fighting for. Everyone has a purpose. They deserve to be here. And I think if we at the JED Foundation can make a difference in someone's life, then that's just truly the most important thing.
Okay. So thank you guys so much for that, and thank you for all the work that you are doing. It's now time to turn over to our panel. So I would love Ali and Danielle to magically appear through the power of Zoom, and let me just introduce them really quickly. Quick screen transition coming up. I said quick, but it's proving kind of slow. Okay. So we've gone from a 30,000-foot view of things from the national scene to now we're going to a much more sort of tachlis, down in the weeds, like some real practical tips and ideas from two wonderful local experts in the field. So I'd love to first introduce Ali Donahue. Ali is the Executive Director of the San Diego Jewish Teen Initiative. Her professional background is in Jewish education, teen engagement, Jewish residential camping, and Israel studies. She received both her BA and MA degrees from American Jewish University in LA, and is the regional chair for the JNF's Alexander Muss High School in Israel program. Danielle Duro is the after school counselor at the Jewish Academy. She has an MA in counseling psychology from the University of San Francisco, and this is her 12th year as a school counselor. So I'm just going to ask a series of questions and then let you guys take them in the directions you'd love to take them in. But firstly, what resources have you found particularly helpful and compelling for teens when they're struggling during COVID, as well as for their parents? So I'm going to start, I'm going to turn this over to Ali first for your thoughts.
Yeah, so hi everybody. I think as far as resources go for teens during COVID, there are multiple social media accounts that your teens should be following to give them more feel-good things. Additionally, there are some accounts that they should maybe unfollow that aren't giving them those happy thoughts for parents as well. And I think that the San Diego Jewish Teen Initiative really prides itself on our mental health and wellness outreach into our community within our community partners, which are the organizations in San Diego, like local synagogues and clubs that work with Jewish teens. So our website, sdjewishteens.org, has tons of resources for parents, educators, and for teens. And I also just think that, you know, the simplest thing is, as a resource, is their friends. Pick up the phone, call someone. It's always great to have someone to talk to. And there we have, I think, some slides that Ali will share at the end too, to really be able to give you all of these resources. But Danielle, is there anything you wanted to add?
So I think Ali has a slide that mentions a bunch of numbers, like a suicide prevention lifeline. There's a teen. Oh, there's all the Instagram accounts. Those are the good ones that they should be following.
Sorry, guys. Ali, if you want to talk about these accounts now,
yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I understand that screen time is a big topic of conversation now, especially with teens potentially learning remotely. If your teen isn't in school, they sit in front of a screen all day. That being said, it's gonna happen, right? They're gonna have their phones out in front of them. We know that they have social media. And these are a few accounts that I feel that I personally also follow and recommend for teens and their parents to follow. And it just sort of gives you feel good things, whether you're having a bad mental health day, a good mental health day, it's encouraging. And additionally, there's a podcast that is relatively new and created by and hosted by a local teen here in San Diego, Shai Davis. She is a sophomore at Westview High School, a member of USY through Congregation Beth Am, and she created this this podcast, Lemonade, for teens by teens, to really talk about mental health and her mental health. And she has friends on every week, different friends. And it's just a really, an eye-opening experience for even for parents to listen to it. I've listened to it to hear firsthand what teens are thinking. Yeah.
Great. And I believe, Danielle, you were going to mention some of these resources.
Yeah, these are just great phone numbers to have. Hopefully you won't need them, but if you do, I think it's great just to have them. The National Helpline, that's a 24-hour a day, 365-day a year number, and that gives substance abuse and mental health services. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline, there's the Text Teen Helpline. So teens can just text that line anytime and you're talking to a mental health provider. And of course, texting is their preferred way of communication the most of the time. There's another crisis text line, which is the same thing for teens. And again, hopefully this won't be needed, but I think it's a good idea for parents to have and for teens to have.
Great. Thank you, guys. And that's very helpful. And as I said before, we will be sending out all of these resources as we go. After the presentations today. What things should you look out for as signs of depression, anxiety, and what are the first steps if you are noticing these things to help teens and to talk to them? And maybe Danielle, if you want to go first.
Okay, sure. So I would say isolation, which is so tricky right now because, everyone seems a bit more isolated than normal. And if kids are virtual learning and they're in their rooms, they're isolated. So I would say look out for isolation that's out of the ordinary. If this is unusual for your son or daughter to be spending more time by themselves or not even connecting with their friends at all, I would say that's a big one, and talk about it with them. And it goes along the same lines as any changes in behavior or mood, appetite, sleep. And again, I know that's tricky with people in general, but especially teenagers, because all that stuff changes. I mean, mood changes, right? So hard to decide whether or not a mood change is going to be something that you need to pay attention to. But I would say if it's something drastic or if it's on a regular basis, you're noticing really just unusual mood shifts. If they're sleeping a lot more, if they're sleeping a lot less, if they're not eating or not eating as much, maybe overeating, and I know again with COVID, I think I was talking to my mom, and one of the big things during COVID, it's what are you going to eat today, or what are you going to watch on TV? So I think if they're eating more than normal, it might just be something pleasurable in their day. But if it's sort of an ongoing thing that you're noticing, I would pay attention to that. Self-harming behavior, any type of self-harming behavior is obviously alarming. Anger, irritability, again, just out of the ordinary if it's not like them. What are they posting on social media? I know some parents probably have access to their kids' phone and social media, and some parents don't. If you do, or if you hear of things that they're posting on social media, or if they're following or liking things that are alarming to you, I would say that's a big red flag. Not bathing or taking care of their physical appearance anymore. Falling grades, that's always big. That's typically a very big one for parents. They notice that a lot. If their grades start falling, that's a big one they notice. And of course, substance use and abuse, thoughts of hopelessness. If your kids express this in any way, shape, or form, I would say definitely pay attention to that. And of course, suicidal thoughts and actions, time to step in long time ago to step in. That would be those. Before we get into the others, Allie, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, to go off the thing that you last said as far as like suicidal thoughts or actions, I think that teens can easily throw around words such as like, oh my God, I want to die, or I want to kill myself. And I would, even if it seems like it's in a joking manner, or comes across in like a laughable way, I do think that that's a great time to actually say, that's something serious. And I would hope you would reach out, or get help or ask me for help as a parent, like if that was the case, so that they then know right away that suicide and is a serious conversation and not something to talk about lightly. And I think, Danielle mentioned sort of not bathing or taking care of their physical appearance. And I would just add that changing their physical appearance is another sort of sign. So cutting their hair, from if it's a girl, and drastically cutting their hair from short to long, or coloring it a different color. Even, I know this sounds crazy, but Danielle mentioned mood, and I think for girls, nail polish is a very expressive thing for people. And if you notice that, your teen or your child usually wears something that's more muted, and all of a sudden it becomes, it's just something to look out for. They could be really subtle signs. But also it's okay to see something and just ask. I think that, the worst thing that you can do is stay quiet about anything that might be concerning or worrying to you.
That's great. And so you've noticed a change, or you've noticed something that has caught your eye. And so how do you go about like having those conversations, with your teens? Danielle.
Okay, sure. Suzanne and Emily did a great job of touching on a lot of this stuff already. But I think everybody who has a teenager, and even who doesn't have a teenager, knows that they really want to feel heard and understood, and to feel safe. And that listening as an adult, you will get far more than doing all the talking or most of the talking. Whatever you can do to create a home environment where kids feel safe expressing themselves, just letting them know that whatever they have to tell you or express, it's going to be accepted. And to keep as an adult, to keep your own emotions and reactions in check. Because I think a lot of kids, I've heard, sadly enough, from so many students, they don't talk to their parents about these types of feelings when they're feeling really depressed, because they don't want to upset their parents. Because their parents, when maybe they've mentioned it, something like that, their parents freak out, or their parents sometimes even have a reaction where they get angry with them, just, because they don't know how to respond. And so many kids keep it in, and they actually don't want to talk about this stuff because they don't want to upset their parents. So please keep, as an adult, try and keep your own emotions in check, and know that if your child wants to talk to you about this stuff, consider yourself lucky, and, take it from there. Try as hard as you can not to judge. If they're talking about, maybe they're experimenting with something that isn't a good idea, it's still a conversation, and you can still make it into something good. So try as best you can not to judge what they're saying. I know Suzanne mentioned this before, is really take time to connect. I would say, if it's possible, I know this is probably scary to so many people, especially teenagers, if you can turn off your phone, if it's for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, or even just turn the ringer off and go for a walk together. The idea is just not to have distractions, just to have a safe space where you guys can connect, even if you're not even talking, even if you're just kind of sharing some quiet time together. It's just a way to feel safe together. And so when your teenager might want to share things, they know they can. I would say ask open-ended questions. instead of something like, how was school today? You could say, tell me about your day at school today. I'm sure everyone has run into that. Teenagers are famous for one-word answers. I mean, I've had to do a million tap dances with kids because I just keep getting one-word answers sometimes. So do your best to ask open-ended questions, you know, and let them kind of explain things if it's possible. I would always try and normalize emotions. Whatever they're feeling, it's normal. You know, even if you haven't felt it yourself, all emotions are normal, just so they don't feel like they're crazy for feeling something, or they're unusual, or they feel isolated because they might be feeling something that's kind of scary. So I would normalize it and let them know it's okay, and you're there, and you're going to manage it together. I know Suzanne mentioned this, is there's like, for so many kids and people in general, maintaining a regular schedule, especially right now during COVID when things have been so out of whack, will give a sense of predictability and control and calmness if you can create a schedule at home or wherever it is, just so they have some idea of what to expect, whether it's in their day or in their morning, what they're going to have for breakfast. Because so many things right now are so unpredictable, which is scary. I would say that it's okay for your kids to know that you're stressed. I think it's actually important, because stress is a normal part of life and it's not going anywhere. And I don't think the idea is to eliminate stress, it's to learn how to manage it. So I think if you can let your kids know that, you know, you get stressed too, and just model how to manage it in a healthy way for them, I think that that's giving them the tools for them to do it as well, rather than to be so afraid of it. I mean, I think everybody, if you haven't already figured out ways that you manage your own stress, probably a good time to maybe start doing it, whether it's exercise, which I know is a great stress reliever for so many people, cleaning, whether it's like cleaning out your closet or, you know, the refrigerator, things like that. It gives you a sense of accomplishment, and it can give you a sense of control as well. Taking a bath, talking to a friend, therapy, of course, spending time with your pets. I always say pets are the best therapists.
I'm just going to add a few things, or kind of, yeah, awesome. So I think one thing I didn't mention as far as like a resource, which is really simple and Danielle touched upon, is just ecotherapy, or going outside. Fresh air does wonders for your brain and for your overall emotion. I cannot tell you how many days, especially during this pandemic, where I've been sitting in my office chair and there's no, you know, water cooler talk. There's no reason to get up and move. And I look out my window and I'm just upset. And it's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to go for a walk. So you get outside and you take a 5 or 10 minute stroll, and you come back and you feel like a whole new person. It's basically like doing a workout and having those endorphins all of a sudden. It's amazing. It really gives you a fresh perspective. And I know, you know, when we mentioned signs, it's sometimes hard to convince your kid, you know, get outside and all those things. My parents said that to me even very recently. But I think it's important, and for you to know, right, for yourself too, like Danielle said, validating, normalizing, but validating their feelings, and also, you know, monkey see, monkey do, as far as stress and feelings, and showing them and expressing them and communicating about them. Another big one, and I get this from our girl Brene Brown, but empathy versus sympathy, and really understanding the difference, and empathizing with them will allow them to really feel that you're there and open up to you. I think, you know, and the last thing I guess would be, Danielle touched on it as far as like cleaning, or for me, reorganizing is the best therapy. I yesterday decided I needed a change of scenery within my home office, and I'm going to completely, you know, move furniture around. hang up a picture. Recently, I gotten into puzzling, right? So simple things. I have teens that do coloring at night or rock painting, and then they inspirational rocks and they put them on the beaches. I think that there are small things or little hobbies that as a creative outlet, that's really therapeutic for you and for your kid, and you can do it together or separate.
Terrific. Thank you. I mean, and some of those things sound so obvious, but how many of us actually put these things into practice in our lives on a regular basis? And there's some really useful strategies in there that we wouldn't have thought of as well. So let's say that we've tried our strategies and we're still a little concerned, and we think, you know, what's happening might be above our skill sets. How do we go about bringing in a professional? And especially when, you know, a lot of mental health systems are kind of stressed right now, how do we find resources? Maybe Danielle first.
Yeah, I would say start with your insurance provider and narrow it down by preferences. You can also talk to your pediatrician. They are very familiar with that and giving out resources as well. You can always check out Psychology Today online and get a whole list of resources there as well. We also have, I believe there's a slide for this, there's a bunch of apps. This isn't so much providing therapy. This would be maybe pre-therapy or with therapy as well if therapy is needed. Here's just a bunch of fantastic mental health apps that everyone has on their phone. They all do different things, you know, and some are more like for meditation or breathing, daily check-ins. The CBT Thought Record, if anyone's familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, you know, keeping track of your thoughts and then what leads to maybe perhaps behaviors and trying to change them. I think that, you know, they're all worth checking out.
And we will send out this list with the links after the session as well. Do you have anything to add on that, Danielle? Sorry, Ali?
Yeah, I would just, you know, err on the side of caution, go with your gut. It's your child, right? And especially in the last year, you've probably spent more time with them than you had in years prior. You know them, and you know they're a part of you, and listen to them, listen to what you're thinking and feeling. Today, like, it's very easy to get mental health resources and professional help. So, you know, Danielle said your pediatrician or through insurance. There are also options with not through insurance. What are the two online platforms, Danielle?
The Psychology Today?
No, is it Talkspace is one of them, and the other one is oh gosh, I'm sorry, I'm blanking, but there are two resources that you can find a provider if you don't have insurance, or it's just easier to go through this, where you can talk or text with a professional via virtually, or and you don't have to be, you know, they could be somewhere else in the country, and that's readily available at your fingertips, which is really exciting if it's something that like needs to happen right now.
And again, we'll send out those resources afterwards, so we can put them all in one space for you. I would love to bring back in Dr. Suzanne and Emily, in case they also wanted to just address any of those questions, because I know they have access to national level resources as well. So if you guys are, if you had anything to add to this conversation, we'd love you guys to feel free to jump in, and then we'll go to some of the questions. And anyone who has questions, they have been coming in through the Q&A and the chat. Feel free to keep submitting them as well.
I would add a few things in terms of access to treatment for teenagers. It is a really difficult time to get kids into therapy, and lots of teens are in need of support. And so one thing I would encourage, I love all the ideas that Danielle and Allie have shared, but I would also encourage families who have the ability to consider telehealth and to consider some of the national web-based therapy services that are now available. If your kid really needs treatment, there's some pretty good research that says that actually for a lot of teenagers, those kinds of national therapy services can provide a few important pieces. One is some teens feel a level of stigma walking into a therapy office or building, or the therapist's office in their school building. Telehealth allows them to build a relationship with their therapist in their bedroom, right? And the other is that often you can be a little more discerning in terms of matching your child to a therapist who might be more reflective of their own identity, right? So LGBTQ plus therapists, therapists of color, therapists of a certain faith or a certain political leaning. These are some of the things that can help kids engage in therapy. The other piece I would say is that we also have a lot of sort of the non-therapy resources at the JED Foundation website. We have a number of resources for kids that are social media based. We have one called Press Pause, which is a great stress management, healthy social media use resource. So check out some of the resources at our website. There are different kinds of mental health promoting, stress managing, and also peer-to-peer outreach strategies that kids can learn there. Emily, anything that you would add?
No, I think you covered it.
Great.
Can I just add one more thing, Ollie? Thanks. Something that the San Diego Jewish Teen Initiative has done in the past, and this year we've held 3 trainings, but we do have the option of a community mental health first aid course. There's a training that we do through a national affiliate. All of the teen educators, Jewish teen educators here in San Diego that are affiliated with the initiative have undergone this training. More recently, we offered it to the teachers at the academy that wanted to do it at the San Diego Jewish Academy, as well as parents. So if one of these trainings is of interest to you, or if you've done it before and you want to retake it, maybe my contact information will be at the end, but we'll make sure it's included in the resources that go out. If there are enough people that want this, we can definitely put together a training that can be offered through the community and to the community by the initiative.
I would also add, don't be afraid to reach out to the counselors at your school, or the school psychologist, or the social worker, depending on your school's support structure. They are very, very burdened right now with a lot of need, but they often know your kid, and they often can move in and speak to your kid and get a sense of what your teen needs and help connect you to the right services. They're always a terrific resource.
So let's move on to the Q&A, and I'm just going to ask these in questions from more specific to more general, so that we probably will get through more questions that way. And I think this is for Suzanne. First of all, can you speak more about the communicate your values, don't defend them?
Certainly. So communicating your values to your child is different than defending them. Your child, your teenager, let's be specific, is going to find times where they're going to challenge you on your values, right? And so we want you to find ways to communicate your values, say what you believe, but don't allow your teenager to get you on the ropes. So I actually have a great example. I have been working with a family where the politics are very different between the parent and the child. The parent is politically conservative and the child is politically liberal. And so what we've worked on quite a lot is the fact that the teenager is really trying to sharpen his thinking around progressive politics. and continues to back the parent against the ropes, trying to get her to defend her values and and challenging her values. And so what I've tried to encourage her to do is to just ask questions about her teenager's progressive values, as opposed to defending her own conservative values. Because what the teenager is actually trying to do by starting that argument is do that sort of identity puppy play that we talked about earlier, right? So rather than starting to defend what she believes, she can ask her teenager what more about why her teenager has the values that she does. This disarms the argument because it serves the developmental imperative, which is to figure out one's identity and in some ways to sonar off of one's parents, right? In order to do that, because one's parents are safer in many instances. Another example of it is if you have values around behavior, politeness, etiquette, catch your child being good. You remember the old catch your little child being good? Well, catch your teenager being good when your teenager is showing great table manners or courtesy or thoughtfulness or empathy or compassion. Notice it and comment on it, not publicly in front of their peers and not in front of other families, but quietly. And when you get home, notice how you opened the door for your grandmother and you really helped her carry those groceries in. I really appreciate that. It means a lot to our family that you're caring for your elders in that way. Try to stay away from those times where your teenager puts you on the ropes. And if your teenager does put you on the ropes, say to yourself, they want to figure out how they think, turn it around and ask them questions and communicate your values in other non-defensive ways. Does that make sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. A question maybe for Danielle, and then I think Emily also had some thoughts on this about self-harm. When a child tells you they've been cutting, how do you respond? Not judging, but just to get across how serious it is. What if they don't think it's serious because other kids do?
Yeah. Well, I always ask them to show it to me. I mean, it's typically, on their arms and things like that. So it's okay. I want to see it, and I want them to feel comfortable sort of exposing it to me in a way. I want to know how fresh it is. I want to know how long they've been doing it. I ask a million questions about it. And then I ask their mindset, well, what were you feeling? What were you thinking? What drove you to do this? Is it, and I'm very blunt about it. And I say, is this like a precursor to suicidal thoughts? Did you really want to harm yourself? Do you really want to harm yourself? And a lot of the kids just say, no, somebody else did it and they said it made them feel better. So I wanted to try it and I hated it, or it freaked me out, things like that. But I ask a million questions. I report it to parents, but I always let them know I'm going to talk to your parents about this. I just want to give you a heads up because I don't want there to be any surprises. And I explain it all to their parents. And then sort of depending on the history of it, if there are any other things going on with the student, are they suffering from depression? Are they on medication? Do they have any other form of mental illness? I would talk to their parents about what the next steps are, depending on the whole scheme of things.
And so if you're the parent yourself and your kid comes to you and says they've been self-harming, you would just take the same approach, ask lots of questions, ask them how serious they are.
Yeah, I would still, if I was a parent, I would go through the same thing and ask all the same questions and then kind of figure out like, what are our next steps? Like, is this therapy time? Or is this, if it's really serious, do we need to, go to the hospital right now and get an evaluation, things like that. And a lot of it's sort of a common thing is to sort of take away what they did it with. Are they doing it with the bathroom razors? So it's always advisable for the parents to take away all the bathroom razors. The thing with that is that, yes, it's always a good idea to take those things away. But if a kid wants to hurt themselves, they'll find another way to do it. So don't just think that by removing all the bathroom razors that your kid is never, they have no access to ever hurt themselves or cut themselves again. If they really want to do it, they're going to find something. So just keep that in mind as far as removing things go.
Great, thank you. Emily, and then Ali, did you also want to speak? I don't know if you did or not, you just look like you might.
Yeah, I wanted to just add, as a parent, as a professional, when teens do come to me, and I'm sure when they have come to Danielle, or if it's like whether it was someone told you this was happening, if you recognized it, but especially when your child or a teen comes to you and talks about this, the first thing I do is just thank them for for talking to someone and for feeling comfortable enough to come to me or to you, whoever you are. And they at times will say, and Danielle touched on it, as far as like, you can't tell my parents, or I don't want anyone else to know. And you can't promise them that, because this is really important. And with the a million questions that I also would ask that Danielle went over, I think if they are really, if they're guarded about it, you can come from it as like a infection perspective, as far as a lot of depending on where they've cut themselves, it can easily get infected and could spread to something much worse. And usually teens, for some reason, that scares them. So they'll show you usually pretty quick after that. Yeah, that's just what I wanted to add.
Thank you. Emily?
Yeah, so I wanted to plug a great podcast that actually interviews a clinical psychologist that we have on staff. It's called The Psychology of Self-Harm with Janice Whitlock. It's fantastic, and it really is very detailed about strategies to talk to your teen, and also goes into something that I think is really important to talk about, not to get too detailed, but just to distinguish between this idea of non-suicidal self-injury versus suicidal ideation. And the research shows us that self-injury doesn't mean that there is suicidal attempt. And I know that this can be uncomfortable to talk about, and most people are not well-versed in how to have these conversations, but it is something to think about when this comes up. I would also offer, and of course this is easier said than done, but to really just try to remain as calm as possible when your teen comes to you, and make sure that you're reminding them that no matter what, you love them, you care about them. You might feel a lot of things, but try to, not show how disappointed you are or upset. The last thing that your teen wants is to upset you. They're clearly in a lot of distress. If you do get upset in the moment, I would encourage you to go back to your teen after and say, I got upset in the moment. I was feeling scared. This is why I was feeling scared, because I love you. You can show that humanity, but you really want to be there, as that solid caregiver, because obviously your teen, trusts you enough to come to you. So I think that that's really important. And I also think that if a teen goes to another adult and you are, kind of figuring out how to talk to the parent, you can say to the teen, this is something we need to include your caregiver in. I can talk to your caregiver alone first. We can do it together. Give your teen some autonomy in how that conversation will go. It will help them feel that they have some control in that situation. And sometimes a teen might feel like they can't face their parent directly, and they want that other adult to kind of bring it up to the parent or the caregiver first. So I would say just think about sort of contracting and how you can actually have a conversation with this in as calm way as possible. And I can also send Ollie that podcast, and he can include it in the references, or the resources rather. I highly recommend it. It's very, very informative.
That's terrific. Thank you so much. Lastly, we had a couple questions about executive functioning to do with kids with special needs and also ADHD. Susie, do you want to just bring us home with those questions?
Yeah, there were a few questions in the Q&A box about the differences in the development of the executive functioning and brain development for teenagers with special needs and or ADHD. And so a really quick and oversimplified answer is that what we find with kids who have challenges around executive function is that some of the natural developmental and environmental training processes don't actually work as effectively for kids with those challenges in executive functioning. And so those prefrontal cortex connections are building, but they may need more training, more coaching, more contextual support. They can happen. They often take a little bit longer to happen. And sometimes when executive function deficits are significant, they can take much longer, but that formation of a more focused brain will happen over time. Now, one book that I really love for this purpose is a book called Smart But Scattered, which is a workbook for parents that helps them identify strategies to coach their executive functioning challenged teenager or middle schooler in terms of getting more organized and staying more focused. Really, the idea behind it is the more contextual support you can give a young person to focus, organize themselves, and pay attention, the more you can help train their brain. It's a little bit like they need weightlifting in that area, and their context has to provide them with that.
Fantastic. Well, that we are sadly out of time. I feel like we could keep talking for many more hours about this. But I just want to say thank you on behalf of all of the attendees and on behalf of the Jewish Community Foundation for this really, I mean, just so important and so enriching session that you guys have all provided. So thank you so much, Dr. Suzanne Button, Emily Bader from the JED Foundation, Ali Donahue from San Diego Jewish Teen Initiative, and Daniel Giro from the Jewish Academy for such a wonderful set of sort of educationally enriching resources today. If you are a fund holder, you are invited to the discussion that we'll be having with different mental health nonprofit leaders. That's coming up on March the 10th. And additionally, we'll be sending out the resources, as we've said, all of the resources that were mentioned today by email to everybody after, it'll most likely be tomorrow along with the recording of this session. If you have any questions for us, feel free to reach out. My contact information is on the screen. But otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you once again to all of our panelists.
Thanks, everyone.